Hi, it's Katrina. Theseus and the Minotaur. King Minos was the powerful legendary ruler of Crete, son of Zeus himself, but he is perhaps most famous for becoming the tyrant that demanded the tribute of children to feed the horrific Minotaur. The Minotaur was a creature of his own making. He offended the gods by keeping a beautiful white bull that was supposed to be sacrificed. As punishment, Zeus became angry and caused Minos' wife, Queen Pasiphae, to fall in love with the bull, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a monster. It was half bull and half human and would only eat human blood. King Minos was embarrassed, but refused to kill the Minotaur since it was given to him by the gods. The creature was so powerful that no cage could contain it, and the king could not control it with words or deeds. So King Minos built a megalithic labyrinth underneath his palace on the island of Crete to hold the beast. After many years at war, the king lost his handsome son to Athens. He was so angry, he brutally crushed the Athenians, and in revenge, each year demanded tribute of Athenian youths to feed the Minotaur. They had to be nobles, young and attractive in the prime of their life. In the third year that the sacrifices were to be given to the Minotaur, the people of Athens were tired. Prince Theseus volunteered to be one of the young men. His plan was to kill the Minotaur and end the human sacrifices. When they arrived, the 14 sacrificial victims were locked up to wait until morning, sharing stories about the terrifying beast and its strong limbs and cruel eyes. During the night, Princess Ariadne brought a sword to Prince Theseus as she knew the Minotaur was a terrible beast that must be stopped, and that the maze was a horrible place. She told the prince the labyrinth was built with so many twists and turns that it was meant to make you lose your mind with fear and worry and hunger. Along with the sword, she gave him a ball of yarn so he could find his way out. In the maze, Theseus felt his way in the darkness, trying to remember the twists and turns, and he could feel bones crunch beneath his feet. Suddenly the beast was upon him, and he plunged his sword into its heart. Theseus killed the beast and returned home a hero, along with his princess. Medusa and Perseus. Medusa is without a doubt one of the creepiest creatures in Greek mythology. She was one of the three sisters known together as the Gorgons. They were Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa. Medusa was the only mortal sister, while the other two were immortal and therefore couldn't die. There are actually a lot of myths surrounding the Gorgons, but the most popular is the one of Medusa and Perseus. Perseus was a demigod, the son of Zeus and an ordinary woman. Perseus's grandfather, king of Argos, had heard a prophecy that his daughter's son would grow up to kill him. For this reason, he had her locked in a bronze chamber. But Zeus managed to get in and impregnate her anyway. Once the king found out what had happened, he hurled both Perseus and his mother into the sea, with both of them trapped inside a wooden chest. There was a lot of adventure, they were ultimately rescued, and Perseus's mother fell in love with a man named Polydectes. But Perseus and his mom's new lover did not like each other. In fact, Polydectes wanted to get rid of Perseus. He tricked him into going after Medusa. She had serpents for hair, wings, huge claws, and enormous teeth. She was also able to turn men to stone if they so much as glanced at her face. Clever and resourceful Perseus bested her anyway, and when he returned back home, he was so upset with Polydectes that he used Medusa's severed head to turn him into stone. Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla and Charybdis were terrible sea monsters that lurked in the strait between Sicily and the Italian mainland. They preyed on mariners, either by destroying their boats or by eating them. Scylla had 6 heads and 12 feet. Charybdis had the form of a whirlpool. Both creatures were utterly terrible, but Charybdis was definitely the worst. She was the daughter of Poseidon and Gaia, punished by Zeus because she was too lustful. He hit her with a thunderbolt, which throttled her down into the strait where she became a whirlpool and got through her days by sinking ships. Scylla was infinitely creepier. She was said to be a mortal human at one point who had an affair with Poseidon, god of the sea. But she also had an affair with King Minos of Crete and another sea god named Glaucus. All of her affairs got her transformed into a disgusting creature by a sorceress named Amphitrite, who was also Poseidon's consort. Amphitrite turned Scylla into a monster because she was jealous. Amphitrite snuck up on Scylla while she was bathing and covered her in magic herbs. The next thing Scylla knew, she was horribly ugly. She could only make dog noises, she had too many legs and too many heads, and she was banished to inhabit caves and sea cliffs. She spent the rest of time hunting fish and men who dared get too close. Kronos the Titan. Kronos was the creepy titan who ate all of his children. He also happened to be the father of the gods and the son of the sky. Kronos was fathered by Uranus and Gaia, Gaia being the Mother Earth. Kronos was told by prophecy that he would eventually be dethroned by his son. To avoid such a thing from happening, each time one of his children was born, he would eat them. But his wife, Rhea, wasn't super happy about this for obvious reasons. When she gave birth to his final son, a little boy that would grow up to be Zeus, she instead handed the child over to Gaia for protection. To trick the great Titan, Rhea replaced Zeus with a rock swaddled like a baby. When Zeus grew up, he forced Kronos to vomit up all of his siblings who had been living inside his stomach. Then together, the freed siblings, known as the Olympians, defeated the Titans and took their place on Mount Olympus. It's important to note that the story of Zeus and Kronos may reach much further than Greek mythology. In the time that Kronos ruled, it was said that there was no sorrow or sickness and the world was pure. But when Zeus took over, everything turned to chaos and strife. Some historians believe the biblical tale of the fall of man may have been inspired by this very myth. Erysichthon of Triopas. Erysichthon was the son of Triopas, king of Thessaly. Erysichthon's story has to do with the destruction of nature and its deadly consequences. As a relatively powerful man, he ordered that every tree in the sacred grove of the goddess Demeter be chopped down and removed. But while the work was happening, a man came upon a tree covered in votive wreaths. These wreaths were symbolic of the prayers that the goddess Demeter had answered. The man refused to cut the tree down, so Erysichthon took his axe and cut it down for him. By doing this, he destroyed the forest and ended up cursed. The curse was that he would have insatiable hunger. Demeter was the one who punished Erysichthon by putting the spirit of unrelenting hunger, named Limos, in his belly. The more that Erysichthon ate, the hungrier he got. He ended up selling all his worldly goods to buy more and more food, but nothing would satisfy him. When he finally ran out of money and was still as hungry as could be, he sold his own daughter into slavery. In the end, perpetually starved and completely miserable, Erysichthon wound up literally eating himself, arms, legs, body, and all. What do you think of Demeter's revenge? Did the punishment fit the crime? Let me know in the comments below. Zeus and Europa. The tale of Zeus and Europa is about as perverse as it gets. Europa was a Phoenician woman whose mother was named Phoenix. There are different versions of the story, with Europa being the daughter of Poseidon and a mortal. Either way, her parents ruled the Phoenician city of Tyre. She was also beautiful and caught the attention of Zeus. Anyone who has studied Greek mythology knows by now that Zeus was a huge creep. He saw the young girl picking flowers and playing on the beach. Naturally, he needed to have her as his own. And because Zeus always got his way, he simply went down and took her. He transformed himself into a white bull and got close to Europa and her friends as they were playing. At first, Europa didn't trust the bull. After all, where does a great white bull come from if not to trick you? Well, Zeus, in the form of the bull, laid at Europa's feet and seemed to fall asleep. It was enough to put down Europa's defenses. She climbed onto the animal's back, and that was when Zeus got up and ran away with the girl in tow. He literally kidnapped her. Zeus took Europa to the island of Crete. He then did what Zeus does. As a prisoner on the island, Europa gave birth to several sons. One of these sons fought in the Trojan War, another became a judge in the underworld, and a third became King Minos, whose wife would later carry on with a bull as well, and give birth to the Minotaur like I told you before. What's really bizarre about the case of Europa is her story never really wrapped up. There is no end. She just kind of fulfilled her purpose and that was it. But then again, she didn't completely vanish. The entire continent of Europe is still named after her. King Pantheus. King Pantheus was the ruler of Thebes, the son of Echion and the brother of Epeiros. He inherited the throne from his grandfather Cadmus, but one of the first things Pantheus did as ruler was to ban people from worshipping Dionysus, the god of wine. Naturally, this caused Dionysus to get extremely angry. In the god's anger, he manipulated all the women in the city of Thebes to go insane and climb to the top of Mount Cithaeron. What happened next makes the story of Pantheus truly strange. Dionysus convinced Pantheus to go to the top of the mountain and see what the women were doing. Pantheus, dressed as a lady, climbed to the top of the mountain and saw that the women were engaging in frenzied adult activities. Not understanding what in the world was going on, he climbed up a tree to get a better view. But as he was climbing the tree, the women spotted him and thought he was a wild animal. Because they were still frenzied and insane, they ripped him down from the tree and tore him apart, literally ripping his limbs off. The first woman to attack also happened to be his mother, who only realized what she and the other women had done when Dionysus removed their madness and let them return to the city. The moral of this bizarre story for the ancient Greeks was to never shun their gods, otherwise you would get torn limb from limb by your own family. Hercules. The true story of Hercules is one of the most tragic in all of Greek mythology. You might already know that Hercules' father was Zeus. He left Mount Olympus, seduced a mortal woman, and not long after, Hercules was born. But Zeus's wife, Hera, was not super impressed with the god and his constant sleeping around. He had too many illegitimate children, and she didn't like it. In the case of Hercules' mother, Zeus actually took her to bed as a trick. He disguised himself as her husband, snuck into her bed, and got her pregnant. When Hera learned about this, she decided to kill Hercules. She sent a pair of snakes to strangle Hercules in his sleep. But of course, even as a baby, he was way too strong and he killed the snakes. Hercules ended up getting married to a woman named Megara and having 3 strong sons with her. But Hera was still angry. She used her godly powers to influence Hercules and turn him insane. Under her influence, he murdered his wife and all 3 of his children. Naturally, he was heartbroken and distraught. He went to seek punishment for the horrible crime that he had committed. To atone for his murderous sins, Hercules had to undergo the 12 labors. He had to kill the Nemean lion, slay the Hydra, clean King Aegeus' stables in a single day, capture some man-eating horses, and he even went all the way to Africa to steal cows from a monster with 3 heads and 6 legs known as the Geryon. To sum everything up, Hercules brutally murdered his family after Zeus was a creep and pretended to be his mother's husband just to get some action. Why was that behavior the fault of Hercules? You'd have to ask Hera. Orestes and Agamemnon. Orestes was just a child when his father, King Agamemnon, went off to fight in the Trojan War. While Agamemnon was away, his wife took a secret lover named Aegisthus. The main reason she took a secret lover was to get revenge on her husband, who had sacrificed their daughter to Artemis, the virginal goddess of the moon, wind, and the hunt, so that their ships would reach Troy in a timely fashion. When the war was over and Agamemnon returned to Mycenae, his wife was there waiting for him with her new lover. Together, they slaughtered the king, and the woman's boyfriend stole the throne. But the real heir to the throne was Orestes. Fearing for his safety, his sister Electra took him away to live with King Strophius of Phocis. And here's where the creepy part comes in. Orestes grew into a man and vowed to get revenge for his father's death. He visited the Oracle of Delphi, who said the only way to get vengeance was to kill his mother and the false king. He went back to Mycenae, met up with his sister, and together they plotted to kill their very own mother and their stepfather. But this wasn't a happy ending for anybody. After killing his mother, thereby committing matricide, a trio of female spirits of justice named the Furies chased Orestes and drove him insane. He only managed to get away from them by going on yet another long journey, then coming back to become the proper ruler of Mycenae. He even married Hermione, the daughter of Helen of Sparta. Atrius and Thyestes. Atrius and Thyestes were the sons of King Pelops, who also had another son with a mistress. But their mother, King Pelops' wife Hippodamia, was not into having stepchildren. So when her sons grew older, she asked that they kill the son of the mistress. Atrius and Thyestes willingly agreed to murder their stepbrother. Then they went out and took action. But King Pelops wasn't impressed by his sons killing his other son. It was all just bad news, so Atrius and Thyestes had to leave town. They went to the city of Mycenae, became friends with the king, and Atrius eventually inherited the throne. If this is hard to follow so far, welcome to Greek mythology. Everybody seems to be having an affair with everyone and killing all of their family members. When Atrius inherited the throne of Mycenae, his brother happened to be having an affair with his wife. Atrius is then tricked by Thyestes into handing over the throne. Now Atrius has lost his power, his wife has left him, and he has nothing. But at least he's clever. Atrius says to his brother that if he can make the sun go backward in the sky, he would get his throne back. His brother agrees, thinking that it's impossible. Atrius then asks Zeus to pull the trick off for him, which ultimately rewards Atrius with the throne. It was a classic switcheroo. But Atrius is still furious with his brother. He invites him over for dinner one night under the pretense that they're going to settle their issues. There is a great big feast prepared and everything seems to be going in the direction of a happy ending. That is, until halfway through the meal, when Atrius reveals that they were actually eating Thyestes' sons. Atrius had tricked his brother into eating his own children.
Japan's Ushi-Oni. The Ushi-Oni is notorious for attacking people on the beach. At least that's according to legends. In Japan, this creature is a cruel monster that spits poison. Its preferred way of killing is by biting a person and filling them with toxins until they're dead. In classic Japanese form, the creature looks completely ridiculous. Legend says it has the head of a cow, the body of a demon, or sometimes even reverse, with the body of a cow and the head of a demon. Either way, it is horribly ugly. In the old days, people believed that the Ushi-Oni would appear in front of temple gates dressed in a kimono, then sometimes eat a person. But it was also known to appear pretty much anywhere, from rivers to swamps and woods to groves. Like a lot of myths, people throughout the years have claimed to see the Ushi-Oni with their own eyes. In the Kochi prefecture, a man allegedly witnessed the beast in 1776. There was a severe drought that year, and the land had fallen under tough times. To make things worse, the Ushi-Oni showed up and started killing cattle and biting villagers to death. Then a samurai came and shot the Ushi-Oni with an arrow, killing it immediately. This strange encounter was the start of the Momote-sai festival, a ceremony that celebrates the first use of a bow and arrow every year. The Native American Ghost Witch. In the lore of Native Americans, from the Algonquin tribes to those of the Mi'kmaq, there are stories of a mythological creature called a ghost witch. For the Wabanaki tribes, they called this monster a Skadegamut. This witch was the worst of the worst, a type of undead creature that was created when an evil magician refused to remain dead. After the magician's death, he or she came back to life as a twisted and horribly ugly monster. The Skadegamut would come by at night and throw curses at anyone they came across. The only way to get rid of one of these horrible ghost witches was to set it on fire. But according to legends, this was easier said than done. Even as an undead monster, the ghost witch retained its skills as a magician. It also didn't like to come out in the open, but preferred to stalk people going through grief. It would hang out at funerals and then follow people home, terrorizing them to make their grief even worse. Perhaps the strangest characteristic of the undead witch is that it needs to feed on human blood, just like a European vampire. Native Americans were coming up with similar monsters as the Europeans hundreds of years ago. For some strange reason, everyone on Earth seemed to be scared of mythological creatures sucking their blood at night. La Segua. La Segua are monstrous females, evil women who come out at night to spread terror wherever they go. The myth of La Segua likely originated in Nicaragua, and some people even still believe in these monsters today. Segua are basically just ghosts, but very specific ghosts. They are the angry spirits of women who died so full of hate that they had no choice but to come back after death to seek revenge. When they come at night, they appear dressed in horsehair. They search for whichever man it was that betrayed them before they died. These ghostly women will even work together so that they can terrorize the evil men in their lives. In general, they wait until their victim is drunk. Then the ghost tries to seduce them. La Segua are also able to get inside their victims' heads, making them scream, laugh, or act insane. When a man in Nicaragua is acting like an idiot, a fool, or strangely erratic, it's said that a Segua messed with his mind in revenge. But since this is a myth we're talking about, it's important to mention another version of the creature. Some say La Segua is actually a witch that lives in the woods with the face of a horse. She walks through the forest and back roads naked, pulling male victims into the darkness. When she speaks to them with her ghostly horse face, the men are so terrified that they instantly go insane and never recover. In all versions of the myth, La Segua is a ghostly female who preys on male victims, turning them crazy one way or another. German Alp. An Alp is a terrible vampire-like monster from German mythology. It's also kind of like an incubus, a sort of demon. But it's unique in that it wears a magical hat that gives it power. Its hat is called a tarncape. Opposite of the Nicaraguan La Segua, an Alp is typically male and its victims are female. It will attack ladies during the night by controlling their dreams and turning them into the worst nightmares imaginable. The Alp will climb onto the chest of a sleeping woman and gradually become heavier and heavier until its crushing weight finally wakes them from their nightmare. Once awake, sometimes they are still unable to move. Here's where the myth of the Alp gets really interesting. It's hard to trace most mythological animals or monsters back to their source, but this one is kind of self-explanatory. All the symptoms of an Alp attack are the same as symptoms of sleep apnea and sleep paralysis. It's believed that the creation of the Alp, a tiny monster similar to an elf that sits on a person's chest and feeds them evil dreams, was just a way to explain the terror people feel when experiencing sleep paralysis. Rather than explain it scientifically, since they couldn't, they made up this little monster. A phenomenon as simple as sleep paralysis spawned a creature absolutely bizarre, with way too many characteristics. Another thing that Alps were said to do was tangle hair into knots for fun. They also occasionally chewed on horsetails. The Aswang. Aswang is the name of a terrifying ghoul from the Philippines. It's the most feared creature from Philippine folklore, known for stalking men and women alike through the nighttime jungle, sometimes breaking into people's homes and slinking from shadow to shadow in small villages. You probably would never hear about Aswang in the big cities. People in Manila aren't scared of these monsters. But even centuries after the myth began, rural communities in the Philippines still believe that Aswang lurk in the darkness at night. They see these creatures as evil, shape-shifting monsters that share characteristics with werewolves and vampires, though they look more like mutant swamp ghouls. The sad part is that there is no consistent image of the monster because descriptions of it change based on region and village. But there is one thing that people do agree on. These creatures only kill at night, taking on the form of a human being during the day so that they can blend in with regular people. When night comes, they shift into their ghoul form, hunt down somebody walking by themselves before feasting on their flesh and drinking their blood. The only way to tell an Aswang from a normal person in the daytime is to look directly into their eyes. If you see your reflection is upside down, you are staring into the face of a monster. The Hydra. The Hydra is one of the coolest and creepiest creatures from Greek mythology. It's also one that has always captured our imaginations. But the truth behind how the Hydra was created is not something most people know. In the myth, the Hydra is a creature born of the Titans Typhon and Echidna. It's a water monster with 9 heads, with one of them being immortal. It lived in the marshes near the Greek city of Argos, occasionally coming out of the water to eat livestock. Anyone who tried to cut the head off the Hydra was shocked to find that 2 would grow back in its place. This made the creature pretty much undefeatable. The only one who ever did best the Hydra was Hercules, along with the help of his nephew Lolaus. Hercules was smart enough to know that when he chopped one head off, he needed to burn the wound so that no heads could emerge. His nephew helped him to do this until only the immortal head remained. Then Hercules cut that one off and buried it under a rock so that it could never regrow itself. If this myth is to be believed, the head of the Hydra is still buried somewhere in Greece. just waiting to escape its rocky prison. Gollum. A golem is a monster from Jewish mythology, a creature made of clay that has been brought to life by magic. The Hebrew word golem translates to something unfinished. In Jewish mythology, the story of the golem goes back to a pair of Jewish mystics who learned how to create a baby cow from nothing but earth as they traveled through the inhospitable desert. They did this by speaking a special formula from the Book of Creation, making a cow from nothing so that they could eat it. The story of the golem is actually the origin of the phrase abracadabra. The word is derived from avracadabra, which is Aramaic for I create as I speak. Jewish mystics believed that under the right circumstances, an ordinary human could bring life to something lifeless by creating a soul. It was an alchemical task in their eyes, something that could only be accomplished by the most skilled magicians. It was rabbis who began creating life from dust in the form of golems. These golems were created by rabbis to defend Jewish communities from attack. They would make giants out of clay, then recite spells to turn the huge sculptures to life by giving them a soul. The golems would then protect the Jewish people. But of course, where there is good, there is also bad. Evil magicians could also create golems to cause trouble. The Mogollyon Monster. The Mogollyon Monster is a creature that has a lot in common with Bigfoot, only it supposedly lives in Arizona. Reports of a strange creature, huge and hairy like some kind of prehistoric ape, go back to the early 1900s. Specifically, reports began pouring in from around the Mogollon Rim that a cryptid was loose. This is how it got its name. The Mogollon Rim is an area in Arizona that ranges from Yavapai County all the way to New Mexico, and includes mountainous areas, a massive forest of pines, and is regarded as an area full of amazing scenery dating back to the Precambrian era, the perfect stomping grounds for a Sasquatch-like cryptid. The Mogollyon Monster is a more recent myth, but it's one that might actually be real. It's also referred to as the Arizona Bigfoot, and it's been described as over 7 feet tall, with bright red eyes, long black hair, and a horrible odor that smells like dead fish or a very potent skunk. The Arizona Bigfoot is supposed to be nocturnal. It can become violent, and it leaves behind footprints over 22 inches long. It's also notorious for entering campsites after dark and leaving its footprints for campers to find in the morning. There's even been reports of this strange creature throwing stones while hiding in the trees, or leaving decapitated deer lying around to scare people. But the absolute most frightening aspect of the Mogollyon Monster is its scream. Everyone who has ever had an alleged encounter with the monster has reported hearing an ear-shattering scream like a woman crying out in great distress. And then after, there is an eerie silence where nothing in the forest moves, not even the wind. The Irish Leprechaun. The leprechaun is a spawn from Irish mythology that we all know, but that few of us fully understand. The earliest reference of a leprechaun goes back to the adventures of Fergus, son of Letty. In the adventure, the king of Ulster falls asleep on a beach and wakes up to 3 ugly creatures dragging him into the water. He overpowers and captures them, at which point they grant him 3 wishes in exchange for their release. From here, the myth spirals. The leprechaun became a solitary creature known for mending shoes and playing jokes. The reason leprechauns are associated with pots of gold is that they stole treasure buried by Irishmen during times of war and then hoarded it. But leprechauns aren't completely good or completely evil, but instead referred to more as degenerate fairies. Leprechauns are also notorious for taking the forms of old men with great beards. In pop culture, leprechauns are actually small like dwarfs, and this is exactly how they are portrayed in myths. Leprechauns are no taller than 3 feet, usually dressed in fine red clothing. The Mananangal. The Mananangal is another vampire-like monster from Philippine mythology, but this one is absolutely horrifying. It's normally depicted as a woman who splits herself into 2 pieces, her upper torso with wings like a bat, and her legs. It uses its great wings to fly through the night looking for victims. It prefers feasting on pregnant women while they sleep, using its extremely long tongue to suck the hearts out of fetuses. But if there are no fetuses around, it will settle for sucking the blood out of whoever it can find. The only way to defeat the terrifying Mananangal is by locating its vulnerable bottom half and then sprinkling salt on its legs. Either that, or if one is able to stop the upper torso from rejoining with the legs before sunrise, the creature will burn up and die. This is one of the strangest iterations of a vampire in any cultural mythology, yet it does share a few similarities with other vampires, such as a fear of garlic, holy water, and sunlight.
Ho Hoard. In 2015, while excavating a cemetery in Jiangxi province in China, archaeologists unearthed an incredible discovery. They found 187 large gold coins from an aristocrat's tomb inside 2 boxes belonging to the grave of Ho, or the Marquis of Haiwen. The coins went far beyond the team's expectations. They also found 25 hoof-shaped gold ingots. The grave also contained several jade artifacts, including a pendant decorated with dragon and phoenix patterns, as well as bronze objects. Archaeologists were fascinated by the jade items, which they said represent the Han Dynasty's highest quality craftsmanship. These were just some of the 10,000 artifacts that were eventually found within the tomb. The treasures make up the largest and best preserved collection of gold items ever found in a Han Dynasty burial. One coin weighed in at 250 grams, putting its estimated value at $8,611 based on market prices at the time of the discovery. The Marquis of Haiwen's tomb dates back to sometime between 206 BC and 24 AD, during the Western Han Dynasty, and it's the best preserved burial from the era ever found. Black Swan Project. In 2007, a company called Odyssey Marine Exploration flew $500 million worth of treasure from Gibraltar to its headquarters in Florida. It refused to reveal the origins of the cryptic hoard, which included 17 tons of mostly silver coins. The company did admit that the coins were mostly from one particular shipwreck, but that there were coins from other wrecks thrown into the mix. Most of the currency is likely uncirculated, according to rare coin expert Nick Breuer, who examined several thousand of the coins. It was later revealed that Odyssey filed court paperwork for rights to salvage the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, a Spanish warship that sank off the Portuguese coast in 1804. Naturally, the Spanish government fought the case and claimed ownership. Because some of the coins were minted in Lima, the Peruvian government also claimed dibs on the treasure.
The court ultimately ruled that the hoard rightfully belongs to Spain, and Odyssey was ordered to turn over the treasure and to pay over $1 million to the Spanish government for bad faith and abusive litigation. Treasure in Bulgaria. Back in 1949, 3 brothers named Pavel, Petko, and Mikhail Dakov were working together at a tile factory in Bulgaria when they unearthed what they mistakenly thought were some brass instruments from the Roman gypsy culture. They were digging clay when they stumbled upon the collection of 9 objects, with no awareness that they had just found actual treasure. An expert reported to the scene and identified, much to the brothers' surprise, that they had uncovered 24-karat gold Thracian artifacts dating back to the 4th or 3rd century BC. Scholars believe that the items are a ceremonial set belonging to King Suthes III. The vessels are decorated with scenes from Thracian myths and culture. 4 of the pieces are rhytons, or ceremonial cups, shaped like the heads of animals and women. 2 resemble deer, and 1 takes the form of a ram's head. They represent some of the best preserved Thracian artifacts ever discovered, as well as some of the most valuable, with a combined weight of 13.4 pounds of gold. This collection is one of the best surviving artifacts of Thracian culture.
San Jose Shipwreck. The Spanish galleon, the San Jose, was laden with gold, silver, and emeralds when it sunk off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia in 1708. It was sailing as part of the Spanish treasure fleet when the ships crossed paths with a British squadron. The encounter erupted into what became known as Wager's Action. San Jose's powder magazines exploded during the skirmish, causing the galleon to sink with most of its crew and all of its treasures still on board. Only 11 people survived the harrowing ordeal. Nobody knows what exactly caused the explosion, but some experts speculate that the ship's captain shot them because having the treasure plunged to the sea floor was better than letting it fall into British hands. The wreck remained missing for centuries as treasure hunters scrambled to locate it in hopes of cashing in on a huge fortune. Based on the cargo that reportedly went down with the San Jose, the goods are estimated to be worth upwards of a whopping $14 billion in modern currency. When the Sea Search Armada, or the SSA expedition funded by U.S. investors, claimed to have found the wreck in 1981, The Colombian government was quick to establish a new law giving itself rights to the treasure. Authorities refused to let the discoverers excavate the site, and they retaliated by suing. Long story short, the wreck was declared property of the Colombian state. The country's navy rediscovered the submerged ship in 2015, and the custody battle ensued, this time with Spain trying to lay claim to some of the goods. The indigenous Cara people of modern-day Bolivia, whose land the treasures were extracted from, have also expressed an interest in collecting in on the fortune. Sea Search Armada is also still fighting for its piece of the pie, and the case currently lies in the hands of the Colombian Supreme Court. The Środa treasure. While demolishing a building back in 1985, workers in Środa, Poland found a vase filled with 3,000 14th century silver coins. They unearthed even more coins in the building next door, along with gold Florentine coins called florin. Locals flocked to the landfill containing the building debris and discovered more treasures, including a gold crown that likely belonged to Emperor Charles IV's wife, Blanche of Valois. They also found 12th and 13th century gold pendants, a sapphire ring, and a gold clasp containing precious stones. The items are worth an estimated $120 million. Scholars believe that Emperor Charles IV pawned the items to raise money to back his claim that he was the true king of the Romans. Soon after that, the plague struck Poland, and the banker in possession of the hoard either fled, got sick and died, or was persecuted for his religion, as Jews were commonly and wrongfully blamed for the disease. Poland's National Museum owns most of the treasures now, but it's possible that there are some stray items that remain undiscovered or in unidentified hands. Have you ever found any treasure by accident? Let me know in the comments below. Christ Mocked. An extremely rare and valuable painting by the 13th century artist Cimabue hung inconspicuously on the wall of an elderly woman's home in France for years before it was discovered. It wasn't until the house was being cleared out for auction in 2019 that an auctioneer named Philomene Wolff noticed the valuable Renaissance work. Known as Christ Mocked, the painting depicts the mocking that Jesus Christ endured in the hours leading up to his crucifixion. And thankfully, it was found in excellent condition, despite being hung above a hot plate in the kitchen of the home. At first glance, the artwork is nothing special. Measuring just 7.9 by 9.4 inches, it's rather small. But thanks to Wolff's keen eye for masterpieces, it was just narrowly spared from going to the dump. She estimated the painting's value at somewhere between $360,000 and $480,000, but recommended consulting a specialist. And as it turned out, Wolff's estimate was quite low. The piece sold at auction for an astounding $26.6 million to a group of US-based Chilean collectors who specialize in Italian masterpieces. But the French government was eager to get its hands on the painting and blocked it from being exported under the condition that the country has 30 months to raise enough money to buy it. Whether this will happen remains to be seen. Stolen Viking treasure. In 2015, metal detectorists George Powell and Leighton Davies discovered a large Viking treasure hoard on privately owned land in Leominster, England. The trove consisted of 300 Anglo-Saxon coins and jewelry dating back between the 5th and 9th centuries. Its value is estimated at up to $16,230,000. Because they didn't actually have permission from the landowner to search the property, the duo kept quiet about their discovery. They also wanted to cash in on the goods, which would have automatically become property of the Crown under the Treasure Act if the pair had reported the stash. While finders often receive a reward for turning over artifacts, the payout is nowhere near the actual value of the items. But violating the Treasure Act comes with heavy penalties, and Powell and Davies' greed eventually caught up with them. They tried to covertly sell some of the coins to private dealers, who reported the pair to the authorities. Both men received prison sentences of 8 to 10 years. Not worth it if you ask me. Sadly, while all the jewelry and a gold ingot were recovered, only 30 of the coins were ever found. The judge condemned them at their sentencing for robbing society of the opportunity to enjoy and admire the artifacts, and of cheating the landowner out of his deserved reward. SS Central America Hoard. Nicknamed the Ship of Gold, the SS Central America steamer sank off the South Carolina coast during a hurricane in 1857. It was en route from Panama to New York City when it went down, taking thousands of pounds of gold and 425 people with it to the bottom of the ocean. Eager to find the wreck, treasure hunter Tommy Thompson convinced 161 investors to fund an expedition during the 1980s. They ponied up $12.7 million for the project. In 1988, Thompson and his crew discovered the wreck 8,000 feet below the water's surface. The following year, they recovered around 3 tons of gold coins valued at over $50 million. A slew of lawsuits ensued until finally, a decade later, the team was awarded a 92% share of the wreck. But the lawsuits continued as numerous investors and companies claimed that Thompson and his crew cheated them out of millions of dollars. In 2012, Thompson failed to appear in court and went into hiding with his girlfriend. They lived in a hotel for the next 3 years, keeping a low profile while paying all their expenses in cash to avoid being traceable. The authorities eventually caught up with the couple and put Thompson in federal prison while the case gets sorted out. He claims that he doesn't know where the treasure is and has stubbornly stuck to this story while languishing behind bars for the past 6 years. Although Thompson has some supporters, the judge refuses to buy his story and has continuously demanded answers. Whether or not the disgraced explorer will eventually crack remains to be seen. Uncirculated Great Depression coins. In 2003, a 75-year-old woman named Joan Langford found 10 coins inside a safety deposit box belonging to her family. Because she had worked at her late father's jewelry store in Philadelphia nearly all her life, she had enough knowledge of coins to suspect that they were 1933 double eagles. The double eagle is famous for being one of the rarest and most beautiful American coins. Designed by sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens, the coin features Lady Liberty on one side and a bald eagle on the other. Each of the 445,500 double eagles that were minted in 1933 were valued at $20, but they were never circulated, which made them even more valuable over time. During the Great Depression, the U.S. was plagued by poverty, unemployment, homelessness, and a deep distrust for banks. As a result, people began to hoard gold. This prompted then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt to pull all gold coins from circulation, and the double eagle was consequently never released into public hands. Most of the coins were sealed away in the basement of the U.S. Mint. The agency held onto 500 of them, while 2 of the coins were sent to the Smithsonian. The rest were supposed to be melted down into gold bars. But a cashier smuggled an unknown amount of the coins out of the Mint's possession and into the hands of private collectors. A Secret Service investigation had actually traced 10 of the double eagles to Joan Langford's father, Israel Scott, but they failed to retrieve the coins at the time. Langford assumed that her father legally owned the currency and took it to the Mint for authentication. She hoped to sell the coins, which were worth a whopping $40 million. To her surprise, however, the Mint deemed the double eagles to be stolen government property and confiscated them from Langford. Langford sued the Mint, the Treasury, and various federal officials in 2006. She claimed that there was a narrow window of time during which her father could have purchased the coins legally. Unfortunately, the verdict ruled against her, and the coins remained in the government's possession. The Hexney Horde. Eric Laws was searching his property in Suffolk, England for a lost hammer back in 1992, when he discovered the largest ever cache of Roman treasure ever found in Britain. Known as the Hexney Horde, it contained at least 60 pounds of silver and gold objects, which archaeologists removed from the site by the shovelful. The artifacts include over 15,000 Roman coins, 200 gold items, and dozens of silver spoons. Laws and the landowner received generous 7-figure payouts for the find, which helped experts glean insight into Britain's turbulent separation from the Roman Empire around 410 AD. British Roman subjects had lost the empire's protection during the late 4th century, sparking a period of mass hoarding among citizens in an effort to protect their valuables from enemy raids. Researchers originally assumed that the Hexney Horde had been buried around that time, but they found out that the coins continued to circulate for decades after the empire fell. Nearly all the coins are clipped by up to a third, with the trimmings likely used to make imitation coins. According to archaeologist Peter Guest, this suggests that the Roman emperor was no longer supplying Britain with currency. Archaeologist Catherine Johns speculated that the family who owned the Hexney Horde attached sentimental value to its items and even used them before carefully burying them. indicating that the items were not hidden under duress like they would be during a time of turmoil. Regardless of when the Hexney Horde was buried, which remains disputed to this day, experts agree on one thing. It's one of the most valuable Roman-era treasure collections ever found in Britain.
Lion halftime. While most of us are familiar with the concept of gladiators in ancient Rome, few may be aware of the grim halftime shows between bouts of gladiator battles. Much like the major entertainment events booked for the Super Bowl, there was a show. But for these gladiatorial halftime shows, things were exceptionally more gruesome than they are today. The Romans needed something to keep people in their seats while waiting for the final battles to begin after the opening matches. For this, they used wild animals like starved lions, bears, leopards, and wild boars. Lions were often used to carry out death sentences in the ancient world. Instead of jail, the punishment was death. And of course, why not make a spectacle out of it? Lions could carry out the death sentence and entertain thousands at the same time. A popular halftime show was when the Romans would bring a pair of criminals into the empty arena. They would then put the criminals on a giant seesaw. When one pushed off the ground, he would go 15 feet in the air, while the other one slowly descended to the floor. And that was when they would open trapdoors on the floor of the arena. A starved lion, maybe joined by some hungry bears, would climb out of the floor and immediately attack the criminals stuck on their seesaw. When one criminal pushed off the ground to avoid being eaten by a lion, the other would helplessly be sent crashing down to the floor. Roman entertainment sensibilities were pretty different from today's standards. Rather than general horror, they would place bets on which criminal would be eaten first by the lions. And the bloody spectacle would get the crowd hyped up for the next round of battles. Yellow laundry. The ancient Romans had a bizarre affinity for urine. In today's world, we generally shy away from anything contaminated with our own secretions. But in the Roman Empire, people used both human and animal urine in their daily lives. Here's the grossest thing they used urine for: teeth brushing. Instead of squeezing dentist-recommended toothpaste out of a tube, they would simply use their own pee as mouthwash. They believed that urine helped maintain healthy teeth and a beautiful smile. And as a matter of fact, pee does actually make teeth whiter, but this is because of the ammonia found in urine. Today, ammonia is used in cleaning products. So while they were technically onto something, the concept nowadays is very grotesque. To be honest, however, apparently urine was actually extremely effective at cleaning teeth. But please don't try this at home just because I said so. The Romans also didn't stop there. They used urine to wash their clothing. Their preference when it came to laundry was old and stale urine. The smellier, the better. They would use it in a bucket mixed with water, soaking their clothes and then stomping on their shirts and pants with their feet to make them clean. They even used feces to clean their leather clothes, as they thought that feces made leather softer. Excrement as cleaning products. I guess you're supposed to use what you have at the time? Blood cure. The Romans had cures for everything, but they didn't always make sense. For example, they would frequently use their own pee as a disinfectant to clean burns, lacerations, and even scorpion bites. Using urine as a disinfectant actually didn't stop until the 19th century. More urine uses. But the Romans also had another miracle cure in the form of gladiator blood. They believed that the blood from a gladiator could heal two major ailments: epilepsy and infertility. During gladiator combat, blood from wounded or killed gladiators would be collected in giant buckets, then sold in smaller vials to people in the crowd. Sadly for the Romans, gladiators were forbidden from fighting starting in the year 400. It was simply getting too out of hand. But suddenly, the gladiator blood supply was gone, so they turned instead to taking the blood of criminals. A man named Alexander of Tralles wrote down a recipe around the year 525 for curing epilepsy. He said that the best way to cure it was to wet some cloth in the blood of a criminal, burn the material, then mix the ashes with a good wine and drink it. This was all the rage for centuries. The original slavers. One of the most barbaric things the Romans did was practice slavery. They practiced it to such an absurd extent that no other society has matched their hunger for slaves since. In the Roman world, slaves had roles everywhere. from households to the military, and even served as construction workers and were sent into mines. 1 out of 3 people living in Italy and 1 out of 5 people across the entire Roman Empire was a slave. It was how the Romans built so many cities, roads, and other structures and spread their empire so wide. It was all forced labor and slaves. In the mind of the Romans, being free was not seen as a right, but rather a privilege. They also thought that freedom was only possible because some people were enslaved. Therefore, in Roman society, slavery was never thought of as evil, but rather a necessity. They thought that the only way they could be free was if they enslaved the people that they conquered. Slaves were taken after successful battles, and then when slaves had children, they too would have to serve their masters. To give you a rough idea of just how many slaves the Romans had, they captured at least 75,000 slaves during the First Punic War, and that was only one small war. They also captured slaves through piracy, by trading with other empires, and by breeding them like chattel. One of the biggest slave markets in all of Rome was at Delos, constantly fed by Cilician pirates who raided coastal villages and stole people to sell. Cruel punishments. The ancient Romans were desensitized people who loved cruel and unusual punishments, it seems. One of the most bizarre punishments anywhere in the Roman Empire was called poena culae, or punishment of the sack. It involved sewing a person into a leather sack along with 4 very specific animals. The person would be stuffed into the sack with a snake, a rooster, a monkey, and a dog. Then the sack would be stitched closed and thrown into a river. The individual would then drown inside of the sack while presumably being bitten by a snake, clawed by a monkey, pecked by a rooster, and gnawed on by a dog. Even the animals were being punished in this scenario. As unusual a punishment as this was, it was reserved for people who committed a very specific crime. If you were found guilty of parricide, which means killing your parent or another important relative, you could get the punishment of the sack. For the Roman people, society was very patriarchal. The oldest living male in a Roman family was basically like the king of the family and had impunity. They were able to boss around everyone under their roof and even people living far away, so long as they were blood relatives. If you were found guilty of killing the oldest living male in the household, you basically signed your own death warrant. If they didn't drown you in a river, they would do something else just as horrible. Do you think this horrifying punishment fits the crime? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Brain pudding? Food was just as important in daily life to the Romans as it is to us today. But if you had to go back in time and break bread with these ancient people, you could find yourself sitting at a dinner table with a plate of brains in front of you. The Romans, while mostly eating simple foods, also loved to eat some pretty bizarre things that you probably would not enjoy today. Romans ate a lot of porridge. They liked pork and poultry as well as seafood. So far, so good. But if you were a rich Roman and could afford fancy and exotic ingredients, you were eating some pretty weird things. You might eat wild boar, you might dine on peacock, or you might have fried pig liver sausage. Brain pudding was extremely popular, as was boiled ostrich and scalded flamingo. Anything that moved and breathed was fair game to the Romans. They would eat dormice, fish liver pudding, and even spoiled fish. How does this sound to you? Maybe you're an adventurous eater and have already tried these things? One of the most disgusting sounding foods is something called garum. This was made by taking the insides of fish, all the blood and the guts and the intestines, and stuffing it into a barrel with a healthy helping of salt. This horrible mixture was then left in direct sunlight for several months. It would eventually turn into liquid, at which point it would be strained and eaten with any number of dishes as a sauce. Apparently it was used on everything because it added some excitement to your food. There are still some ancient garum pots and factories that have been excavated recently, and garum sauce was a huge business. Infanticide. Roman people were pretty indifferent about a lot of things in their society, from having slaves to getting rid of their unwanted babies. A recent study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science explains that infanticide was a widely practiced thing in Roman society, as well as other parts of the ancient world. This was before modern methods of birth control had come into play. One of the only ways to keep a family small and to get rid of a baby that would just cause trouble was to throw it away. According to the lead author of the study, Simon Mays, nobody knows for sure if this was an accepted practice or just something that was tolerated. But either way, they definitely threw out a lot of babies. When archaeologists excavated a villa from the 1st century AD in Buckinghamshire, where the Romans lived while occupying England, they found many remains. Specifically, they found 97 infant burials, the largest graveyard of babies anywhere from Roman times in Britain. This was not the only baby graveyard that's been found by archaeologists. They also found a site in the ancient city of Ashkelon, Israel, with over 100 skeletal remains of infants. But in Ashkelon, these infants had been thrown into the sewer immediately after birth. In England, the babies had been buried first. I'm not sure if that's an important distinction or not. Roman plumbing. Going to the toilet in ancient Rome was one of the most disgusting things you could do, but apparently they loved it. To them, it was an absolutely normal part of life, but to us, it was like walking around naked in a sewer. Yes, the Romans were at the forefront of sanitation, but it was still gross. According to Pierce Mitchell from the University of Cambridge, the Romans even had legislation so that towns within the empire had to clear all human waste out of the roads and dump it somewhere else. And while you would think this would have improved people's health, it didn't. Romans were actually infested with parasites like whipworm and roundworm, the very things that cause dysentery. The reason for all these parasites and worms had to do with the public toilets and the public bathhouses. Romans went to the toilet together in a public space, even sharing the exact same brush on a stick to wipe their bottoms. And after going to a public toilet, they would often go to a steamy bathhouse and sit around with other Romans. According to Pierce Mitchell, this was likely a great incubator for parasites. People walked into the bathhouses covered in microscopic poop particles, then let them fester in the steamy environment. So much birth control. The Romans were so insatiable as a whole that they actually caused an herb to go extinct. This herb is called silphium, and nobody knows if it still exists today. It's believed to be extinct because it hasn't been seen in hundreds of years. The herb looked like any normal plant. It had roots, leaves, and small yellow flowers. It also oozed sap, which the Romans found a handy use for. Well, they had a handy use for every part of the herb. People would crunch the stalks of the plant and eat them as vegetables. The roots could be eaten as well, dipped in vinegar. They even fed the herb to sheep to make their meat tastier. They would use this plant to make perfume. They sometimes dried the sap and used it as a garnish for roasted brains and the cooked flamingo. And then there's the real reason that this plant was so popular. Silphium was made into a juice and then drunk as an aphrodisiac. It was also used as the first genuinely effective form of birth control. Romans used it to purge the uterus. The herb was so popular in the bedroom that many historians believe its heart-shaped seeds are the real reason why we still associate heart shapes with romance. But sadly for the world, the Romans used the herb so much as birth control and as an aphrodisiac that it went extinct. The Vomitorium. You may have heard of something called a vomitorium. For a long time, the vomitorium was thought of as a room that the Romans would have adjacent to their dining room. The vomitorium was said to have a basin along with feathers, where guests could go to barf up their food and make room for the next course. If the dinner guests became too full, they would simply excuse themselves to the vomitorium, tickle the back of their throat with a feather, and then barf into a bucket so that they could keep eating. It is the literal definition of gluttony. But according to archaeologists, this may not have ever actually been a thing. It may have just been picked up by popular culture in the early 19th century. Archaeologists say the vomitorium was actually a passage at a public entertainment venue through which spectators would spew forth into their seats. The vomitorium was just a passage leading to the aisles so that spectators could get to their seats quicker. But because of the name that the Romans gave it, in modern times people interpreted the vomitorium completely differently and came up with the idea of a room for puking. But to be quite honest, this is one horrifying thing that the Romans may not have actually done. Though, of course, maybe they did, and we just haven't found the proof yet. Thanks for watching! Would you go back and live in the Roman Empire if you had a time machine? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, be sure to hit that subscribe button for all the best videos from Origins Explained. See you soon. Bye!